Welcome to a Wonder Junkie podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Anderson.
Nobody knows what's going on. Nobody knows. Nobody has the faintest idea. The best guesses are lies. You may be sure of it.
Nice to meet you, Michael.
Good to meet you.
I've been listening to you for some time now. I pretty much have dove into your website and started to discover your work, I think, after reading Robert Becker's books, and then it led me to Andrew Marino, and I read his book called Going Somewhere, and he spent many years with Becker. So that then led me to you. It sounds to me like he inspired you pretty greatly, and you took on a lot of what he initially was working with. Is that pretty correct?
Well, yeah, I mean, finding Becker's book, I was, I think 17 when I found his book, and it really was inspirational, partly because of what he had done, but also because he sort of made me aware that there was a long history of bioelectrics research before that. So, there was some amazing, and I sort of worked backwards from his book and tracked all the pioneers who opened up the field back in, it's starting in 1903 and going from there, but in the 30s and 40s, and then another wave again in the 60s and 70s. There were some amazing pioneers in this field, and so I was first made aware of that in Robert Becker's book. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, and it sounds like you've had your lab operating since 2000. Is that right?
Yeah. My independent lab opened in 2000. Yeah.
Cool. So can you just describe to people, because I think a lot of people are going to discover you for the first time by hearing this, and what is it that you guys have been doing, and what are some of the major paradigm shifts that you've discovered over the last 25 years?
Well, just to give you an idea of what the purpose of all our work is. So what I'm really interested in fundamentally is cognition. I want to understand how minds can exist in the physical world. I want to understand how they scale, how they come to be, how they change, that kind of thing. And we use a variety of model systems to understand how that happens. And in particular, I'm interested in understanding the cognition of pretty alien, very, it's a field called diverse intelligence, where we're trying to understand different minds other than our own and other than the ones that we're used to, which are brainy mammals and birds and things like that. So one of the model systems we use is collective intelligence in cells. So contrary to what many people learn as far as genetics and developmental biology, where the idea is that there's some sort of information in the genome that determines what cells are going to do. And so the process of embryonic development, regeneration, is this kind of rolling forward of chemical laws. And then there's a stereotypical sequence, and then you get an embryo or whatever. So contrary to that, the real story is actually much more interesting. That whole process is an intelligent example of problem solving. It's a navigation of anatomical space, meaning the space of all possible configurations you can build from being a single cell egg or whatever. And I can tell you why I say that. But the point is, what you have in those cases is a variety of cells, and individual cells are already able to do learning and prediction, and cells have some cognitive capabilities on their own, but in these scenarios, you have a collective intelligence made up of multiple cells that goes on to build or repair some very complex structure. And to the extent that we learn how it is that these individual subunits are organized into a greater whole, which has a collective, which has goals and memories and competencies that the individual parts don't have, much like all of us. You and I are a collective intelligence as well, made of neurons and other cell types. To the extent that we learn how that works and we can begin to communicate with them, then we can develop all kinds of useful applications. So for example, in my lab, we take this kind of information and we make applications in the repair of birth defects, in regeneration of damaged limbs and other organs, in cancer, in cancer medicine, in aging, and so on. And so that's what we've done. And it turns out that a really convenient way to communicate to that cellular intelligence is via the bioelectric interface, because it turns out that evolution loves bioelectricity as a good way to pull together collective intelligences. And that electrical interface, just like it is in the brain and in the nervous system for all body cells, is a really convenient way to communicate and to know what they're going to do, and to try to ask them to do different things.
Yeah, that's a good overview, but it's a lot to unpack, of course. And what are some of the biggest things in the last maybe 2 years that you guys have discovered that would be probably unknown to most people if they had never heard of it?
Well, yeah, I'll go back a little further than that, just to give you an idea of the kinds of things that we work on. So one of the things that we've discovered is, in particular around the bioelectricity kind of field, because we do other things, but around the bioelectricity kind of area, we first of all, let's just talk about cancer, for example. So we've been able to we developed back in 2000, and of course it's continuing. We developed the first molecular tools to read and write electrical information into tissues. So neuroscientists have been trying to do this for a long time in the brain, and there have been some nice successes with that. And so we applied some of those same techniques to ask, what are the rest of the body cells thinking about? And they mostly think about shape. They think about anatomical structure. And so we've been able to, for example, develop a technology that can detect when individual cells disconnect from that collective that's storing these large scale patterns. And when they disconnect, they basically become like unicellular organisms. As far as they're concerned, the rest of the body is just external environment to them, because they can no longer remember this grandiose goal that they have been working on, let's say building or upkeep of an organ or something like that. And they go back to their tiny little unicellular goals, which is, make as many copies of yourself as you can, go wherever metabolism is good and things like that. So we've developed technology to, first of all, see when that's about to happen. So we can track using voltage sensitive fluorescent dyes. We can track when cells are disconnecting from that electrical network. We've discovered that actually cancer can be triggered by disruptions of bioelectrical signaling with no DNA damage, no carcinogens, none of those things, but just the dysregulation of electrical communication. So,
Yeah, I'm just curious, like, what are some examples of that dysregulation or that disruption of that?
well, for example, we showed that by targeting a particular chloride channel that the cells use to communicate voltage states to each other, you can recapitulate a metastatic melanoma phenotype. So basically, normal melanocytes throughout the body begin to they transform basically, and they acquire this highly invasive metastatic character. And in that case, there is no primary tumor. It's not a mutation. There is no mutation. It's not a clonal kind of expansion of a damaged cell. It's just a failure of the normal signals that keep cells orchestrated towards specific goals. Because the thing with cancer is, people ask, why is there cancer, and why does it begin, and those on. I mean, the real question is, why is there ever anything but cancer? The real mystery is, why do cells actually cooperate in the first place to do something other than, every man for himself, so to speak. So this is these electrical and of course other signals are critical to keep cells organized towards larger scale goals, anatomical and other kinds of goals. So we've shown that, and then more importantly, we've shown that you can prevent or normalize cancer, and this is all in animal models. So this is not in human use yet, but we're moving there. We're working with human cells and human spheroids and things like that now. But in animal models, you can normalize cancer by reconnecting the cells to the electrical network of the tissue. You don't not by killing them, not by fixing the DNA, but by reestablishing that electrical communication that then will normalize them, and then they join the mind meld, so to speak, that forces them to work on these larger scale construction projects. So there have been things like this in cancer. We've also shown repair of birth defects. So there are, and this is done in the tadpole the system. You can induce pretty drastic birth defects of the brain, the face, the heart, either by genetic mutations or by exposing them to various teratogens. These are chemicals that disrupt development. And when you do that, one of the things that happens is there's a bioelectric dysregulation, and the organs pretty much forget what shape they're supposed to be, and you get these terrible defects. So we've created a computational platform of basically a simulator that you can say, okay, here's the pattern is incorrect. I would like to make it be this correct pattern. Which ion channels should I open and close, and it will pick some drugs for you, and so that target these ion channels. And so we've done that, and we've shown that you can repair really drastic, for example, defects of the brain induced by a notch mutation. And so those two things show that, at least in some cases, hardware defects are fixable in software. In other words, the mutation is still there, whether that be the carcinogenic mutation or the birth defect one. The mutation is still there, but the outcome is normal because it's the physiology, the physiological software is what drives, not the hardware mutation. So we've done that. We've done work on limb regeneration. So we've shown how you can induce limb regeneration in frogs. Adult frogs normally don't regenerate their limbs, and so we've shown how you can induce that with basically a 1 day, 24-hour stimulation of the wound gives you a year and a half of leg growth. Wow. And you don't touch it during that time, and that's kind of key to our approach, because we are not trying to 3D print an organ. We are not trying to talk to the stem cells. We are not trying to tell all of the cells what kind of cell they should be or what genes they should express. We want to provide master triggers at the very beginning to convince the cells this is the path in morphospace that you should be taking. We're not going to be there to micromanage you. You already, I mean, these tissues already know how to do it. They did it, 4 times in embryonic development, so they still know how to do it. And the key is to induce that. So those things, and then more recently, we've been involved in a lot of synthetic bioengineering, making novel proto-organisms that have never existed before. So things like Xenobots, things like Anthrobots, which are made of genetically normal living cells, in one case from frog, in one case from adult humans, that make interesting novel beings that have new forms and behaviors and have never been on Earth before. They're completely new.
I would love to hear more about the Xenobots and what that could potentially mean, even when mixed with something like supercomputers and AI, and if they started to create their own biological or new life forms that we've never even imagined at a super high intelligent level. But before that, there was something that you said, it's like, so basically when you don't want to micromanage and you don't want to 3D print this new organ, instead you're trying to get it back on track to this morphic, would it be something like a memory that you're trying to tap it into, like a field that exists that we just can't really truly fully understand?
Well, it is a memory, and we can understand it we don't know. Let me be clear. There are many things about it that we don't yet know, but this is not some sort of mystery beyond science or anything like that. I want to be super clear that this is a research program that is proceeding very smoothly. There are a million things we need to do, but we have the tools to do it. We can now see. We've shown videos of these memories. You can just like neuroscientists can try to visualize what it is that a subject is thinking about by reading the physiology, the electrophysiology of their brain. We do exactly the same thing, and we can actually see the patterns that the cells are going to build later. So these memories of the future, basically, right? The intent of the collective to build whatever it is. We can read that out, and we can see it, and then we can go in and manipulate it and change it so that they build something else. So, for example, we have these flatworms that they call planaria, and the thing about you have one head and one tail, and you can chop them into pieces, and every piece regenerates a perfect little worm. And so you can ask the question, well, how does it know how many heads it's supposed to have? And you might be tempted to say DNA, but of course, DNA doesn't say anything about the number of heads you have. DNA says things about proteins. DNA encodes proteins. So what we found is that there's a bioelectric gradient in each of these pieces that says how many heads it's supposed to have. And then we changed it by opening and closing these ion channels and changing the electrical pattern memory. And when you change it, we can make them make 2 heads. So you get a worm with heads on both ends. And those worms are permanently 2-headed, meaning that if you keep cutting it into pieces, they will keep making 2-headed worms. So you could permanently change the memory of what it's going to be with no genetic change whatsoever. So the memory in that case, and in many cases, is not genetic at all. It is contained in these electrophysiological circuits. And like any good memory, it's stable, but it's rewritable. So you can go ahead and rewrite it. So there are many questions that we're pursuing now around how to best to simulate that process and how to make the changes that we want for therapeutics. But it is not a mystery in the sense of not being amenable to the normal tools of science. It is absolutely amenable.
It's fascinating. Yeah, it seems like you guys are doing a lot of things all at once, and it's like every day you're probably discovering so much that you don't even know. It's like infinite in all directions almost as far as where you guys can go with this. And hopefully there's a lot more people hopping into the field that are very brilliant and smart and open-minded like you are, that are underneath you. I'm guessing you have a whole bunch of different students. And how big is your lab?
Well, my lab is about 43 people. It's mostly postdocs, so there's a few students and then some technicians and some other support personnel. But it's we're about 40 plus people. I should be clear. At least as far as bioelectricity, I'm certainly not the only person in this field, right? So there are some other really good labs. Matt Harris and Min Zhao and other Emily Bates and lots of other people around the world who are doing this work. We have our approach to this is different because I view all of these kinds of phenomena as a cognitive system. So not just another piece of physics to track in development and regeneration, but actually as the workings of a goal-directed problem-solving collective intelligence. And so that allows us to use tools of neuroscience, tools of behavior science, and cybernetics and things like that I think other people don't really use. But there are plenty of other people that are in this field.
And then when you talk to someone that's a biochemist or people that are physicists or different fields, is it easy for them to use their language and the way that they've trained to learn and think about the world to mix that and cross-pollinate, or is it sometimes challenging to get everybody to think about things in this way?
It is often challenging, and different disciplines have different challenges. So I always tell my students that I know what type of department I'm giving a talk in based on which part of my talk makes people mad. So there are certain things that you can say in a neuroscience audience that they will say, well, no kidding, like this is obvious. And then you say those exact things in a molecular genetics department and people throw tomatoes because there are certain commitments to ways of thinking about things that are quite different across fields. So, for example, so neuroscientists are very comfortable with electrical networks storing information that is not genetic, right? So that's pretty normal for neuroscientists. But the idea that all cells in your body are doing this, not just your brain and not just your neurons, that's pretty shocking to that community. And you often get into debates about what really is a neuron and things like that, because most of the cells in your body do what neurons do. So there's things like that. Computer scientists are usually people who work in computer science, engineering, artificial life. They're usually the most open-minded about this stuff. But even there are some important schisms, because the whole thing about computer architectures is that you try for fidelity of the data, meaning that you have these abstraction layers that when you're operating in a high-level programming language, you don't have to worry about your copper and your silicon, and that the numbers in your memory registers are going to float off. They like to keep the computation accurate, but biology does the exact opposite. Biology is working in an unreliable medium, and so there's multiple interpenetrating layers of interpretation, and there is no one story about what the algorithm is or what it's computing. Different observers have different meanings to the data, and things like that. So yeah, different communities have different expectations.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And I'd love to hear you describe, I've heard you do it before, but just the idea of being born at such a simple single-celled thing to becoming this complex existential being that has this identity that thinks that they're a self. And then you've had people write you and tell you that now they feel meaningless, or there's this existential crisis because of the way that you describe the nature of consciousness. And when I first heard that, it made me think that it was even more cool because it's more of an interesting element to the mystery that we're a part of. So it doesn't take away from, to me, it only expands and makes it more interesting. That's the way I think of things. But I'm curious what you think of the nature of self in that process.
Yeah, it's interesting, the mysteries and so on. It's interesting. Some people really have the feeling that once you understand how something works, that you've somehow drained the mystery from it, and then it's not as fun anymore. I gave a talk at some major university once, and someone came out, and I talked about bioelectricity, and I did, the first half of the talk I show what it does, and then I kind of explain how it works. And somebody came up to me and he said, for the first half of the talk, I thought it was really cool, but then you showed how it works, and now I don't care anymore because it's just more chemistry and physics. And I was kind of shocked by that. I mean, what else is it going to be? Of course, underneath everything is physics if you look close enough. But that's missing a huge chunk of what's amazing here, right? Zooming in and just saying, "Wow, it's all physics." That doesn't actually that misses a lot of the point, because a lot of the meaning comes at higher levels. So yeah, I don't basically every time we come across an explanation of something, it opens the door to 100 other questions. And so, we've never run out of mysteries yet. So I'm not worried about that aspect
Yeah.
of it. Yeah, I mean, our journey, it's interesting. People, because the other area that I work in, because I work in diverse intelligence, I interact a lot with people in AI, with people in philosophy of mind, right? These kinds of things. And there's a lot of discussions of those kind of issues where people say, well, that's just a machine, but I'm a real being. And so you have to, and I think anybody who wants to think about that stuff has to take a developmental biology class. Because when you take a developmental biology class, you see that all of us started life as a little blob of chemicals and an unfertilized oocyte. So it's a little blob of chemistry and physics just sitting there. And then right in front of your eyes, at least in the case of a frog embryo, for example, right in front of your eyes, slowly and gradually, with no magic lightning flash that turns physics into mind, slowly and gradually, that system scales up to be whatever we are, right? And it scales its cognitive light cone. By cognitive light cone, I mean the size of the biggest goals that the system can work towards. So initially, you're a single cell and you have very sort of tiny goals, and then by the time you're a human, you can have sort of grandiose goals in multiple problem spaces. So that process tells us that we can that what you need is an understanding of the transformation that happens, not magical categories of being just physics or just a machine, and then we are whatever we are, but not these ancient magical categories, but an understanding of the transformation. How do we get from here to there? And there are many interesting things about it. For example, when you look at an embryo, let's say there's 100,000 cells in a flat blasted disc. What are we counting when we say there's one embryo? There's 100,000 cells, and there's God knows how many molecules underneath that. What are we counting when we say one embryo? Well, what we're really counting is we're counting a particular kind of commitment to a story. The story among the cells, and they've all committed to it, is where are we going to travel in anatomical space? We're going to travel over here. That specifies a giraffe or a tree or whatever we're going to be. And that's what hangs together. That's what keeps it all together, is that they are all committed to the same outcome that they're looking for. And the fact that we are all collective intelligences is something else that's really important, because people will say, well, there's bees and ants and things, you can kind of talk about them as being a collective intelligence, but I'm a real intelligence. I've got the centralized brain. Well, if you look inside the brain, you don't see one of anything. You see a bunch of structures inside of those. You see a bunch of cells inside of those. You see a bunch of molecules. So it's the process. It's that cognitive glue that binds all the different layers into a higher level collective that we need to understand. And by the way, if you have an embryo, an early blasted disc, and this was first discovered in duck embryos, but it works in humans too. If you cut it into pieces, each piece will develop fully into its own being, and that's how you get monozygotic twins and triplets and quadruplets and so on. And so the question of how many individuals are in there, when you look at an embryo, like how many beings are in there, you have no idea. And it's not set by the genetics. It's anywhere from 0 to half a dozen or more, depending on how things go, because it's an autopoietic, meaning self-creating process. So we really need to keep an eye on that. Never forget where we came from. We are a self-assembling collective intelligence that scaled up from some very humble beginnings.
Yeah. It's always fascinating to think about just the fact that we are little linguistic meaning-making machines of some sort at some level. We're always using the models of reality that we have in our time to create these stories. And a lot of times I just feel like that's where we get hung up the most, and that's where we have the opportunity, if we do have any kind of will or whatever we are, but is what meaning are we giving this thing? Or if you're an optimist or a rational optimist, you would look at it as, okay, we're explorers, we're always curious, we're trying to seek to understand more about the nature of reality. That might be a goal in and of itself that's meaningful, just to keep going and being expanded and being blown away and have awe and wonder, versus I need to have this refined answer and I need to know. And I just feel like that is the difference between suffering versus joy. If you were to look at the root of suffering, it could be just lack of perspective, continuously trying to get a different way of looking at the way that we are and seeing a bigger story or a more true story.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't recall exactly who said it. Maybe it was Yuval Harari, but I'm not sure. But somebody said that the thing about humans is that we're storytellers, and yes, but all the way down, so all the way to molecular networks and possibly below that, it's all storytelling,
Hmm.
right? That cells and tissues and organs, everything they're doing in various problem spaces, many of which we can't see, that are hard for us to see. All of these systems are trying to tell stories, meaning maintaining on the fly a model of what they are, what the outside world is, what should be the next thing they do, what do my memories mean. So this whole business of having to continuously reinterpret your memories of in order to in order to have a coherent set of policies going forward, right? It's this like continuous need to, because we don't have access to our past. What you have access to are the engrams, that were the memory traces that were left in the past by past versions of you that were left in your brain and body. And so those are messages. Your memories are messages left by your past self, and both for all living things, but also on a scale of evolution, where what you have passed down is the DNA, right? That has been produced by past versions of you, but now you have to interpret that, and you don't necessarily interpret it the way that it was interpreted in the past. That's the whole point of biology, is that it does creative problem solving by reinterpreting the memories it has all the time. So we are continuously constructing our memories, our self model, and every time you read a memory, you change it, right? And so we're continuously constructing our past, but also because we're future focused. The question is, what do I do next? So that's one thing that's currently very different than most computational architectures, which is that you're not optimizing for the fidelity of your information. You're optimizing for the saliency of it, so that to tell the most useful story you can to guide your future. So I think, and this is true for cells and tissues and molecules inside those cells too. So yeah, it's all storytelling.
What did you mean when you were speaking about bioelectricity being the cognitive glue?
Yeah, what I mean is, so you and I are fundamentally piles of neurons and other cell types. And what makes us more than just a pile of cells is that we, as a larger scale system, have goals, preferences, memories, and things like that none of our individual neurons have. So in order to do that, in order to bind competent subunits into a larger whole that is going to operate in a new space, it's going to have a larger, individual cells operate in metabolic spaces, they operate in gene expression spaces, they operate in physiological state spaces, but we operate in the three-dimensional space, right? Our goals exist in 3D space. We also have goals in all kinds of other crazy spaces, financial spaces, political, economic, linguistic, who knows what else, right? And
Hmm.
so in order to scale your cognitive light cone into these other problem spaces, you need to have the individual parts need to have some kind of policies and mechanisms in order to align together so that they can do things that no individual one can do.
Hmm.
And in our case, in the case of the brain, it's well known what that is. It's electrophysiology, aka bioelectricity. It's the electrical network that all of these components are part of, that binds them together towards large scale purpose. So you might have a goal that 3 years from now I'm going to buy the house or whatever, and no individual neuron knows what a house is or can wait 3 years for a goal or anything like that. The individual cognitive light cones are very small, but the collective has this massive, or you might be working on world peace for the next 100 years. So the collective can do that, but not the individuals. And so the cognitive glue are the mechanisms that align your parts towards the goals of the whole. And this is true in cells making an embryo, in molecular networks making up cells. They all have to align their activity in various spaces to enable the function of the whole.
Yeah. And then culture would play such a huge role in that. And we sort of are engineering and creating this collective culture that outlives the individual, and then you're born into it again, and you have this memory, as you said, and then you're inheriting this giant thing that's also changeable. So I don't know, just describe culture to me, because I think it's one of the most fascinating things that seems to be alive and have its own signature and its own memory, right?
Yeah, so to be clear, I'm not an expert on any of that stuff. So anything I say is just my own
Yeah.
personal thoughts. I don't have any expertise in culture level kinds of things. But I mean, I think the first thing we need to say is that, and this is a central part of the framework that I've developed, which is that we have to do experiments to ascertain the type of intelligence or and the degree of intelligence that we're dealing with. So there are people tend to go two ways. So for example, the more sort of romantic kind of folks will say things like, oh, the whole earth is a single organism, the ecosystem and the planets and the universe, the whole universe is this organism. And then people who go, so the reductionist folks who go the other way will say, no, 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 there isn't any mind. Some of them think there isn't any anywhere. They sort of eliminativist type of arguments. But oftentimes they'll look at things like cells and tissues, and they'll say, oh, no, 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 this is just mechanics. There's nothing. There's no intelligence there. And my point is both of them are equally wrong, because you can't know these things sitting in an armchair doing philosophy. You have to do experiments, which means that in order to know whether something, to how intelligent something is, what kind of cognition it has, you have to do experiments. You have to hypothesize what space is it working in, what goals might it have, and then you get to find out by doing perturbative experiments, meaning you try to prevent them from reaching their goal. And that's how you find out how much ingenuity that system has towards reaching those goals. So that's a lot of hard work, and it's doable. Often we've developed tools to do it, and other people have to. It's doable, but it's hard work. And so when we're talking about large scale things, such as societies or ecosystems or whatever, doing those kind of experiments is really hard. And in particular, gaining evidence that you yourself are part of one of these larger scale systems, I think is really hard. I have a cartoon that I asked our graphic designer to draw for this kind of thing, where there's like two neurons in a brain having a discussion, and one neuron says to the other, the universe is this cold mechanical place. There's nothing but physics out there. No, the universe doesn't care about us. There's no meaning to it. There's no memory to it. There's no patterns to it. It's just physics. And the other neuron's a bit of a mystic, and he says, yeah, but I really have this strong feeling that the world we live in has like its own mind and its own consciousness, and there are these patterns and sometimes we get rewarded and punished for things, and I feel like there's a pattern to it. There's an order, and of course they're both parts of a brain, and so in that particular case, the mystic neuron is correct, because their universe actually does have a greater mind than they can perceive. So, but how do you convince, how do you convince each other of that or not, or how do you determine whether that's the case? I think that's really hard.
Yeah.
And we can talk about it a little bit, but it's not trivial to say that. I mean, it seems perfectly likely to me that the structures that we build, the financial structures, the social structures, all all those kinds of things, they probably are collective systems with interesting kinds of cognition that are pretty alien to us, but it is not obvious that they are, and there would have to be some way of determining that, and we can barely do it with things that are smaller than us. We certainly don't know how to do it in any practical sense for these larger scale systems.
Yeah. Yeah, you seem to have quite an encyclopedic mind, the way you can think about everything and package it and then just distribute it to people so easily. That's one of my favorite things about listening to you, is like you have an incredible recall. And even that in of itself is like, what is really happening there? Sometimes you just get caught up in thinking about how you think, and your brain is doing something interesting for sure. Before I miss this, because I wrote it down to ask you because you would know, is Andrew Marino's work when he was in the lab with Becker for all those years. He wrote that book, Going Somewhere, and his whole life ended up becoming a bit obsessive with trying to stop the industry from going forth, right? And the implications of what they were discovering in the lab, like you are discovering, is all this incredible stuff of what we can do and what we can create, and how much bioelectricity plays a role in regenerating limbs and helping with cancer. But at the same time, you then have an industry that's exponentially growing, and there's not enough microphone or voice to the data that would show maybe the negative implications on biology and on our health. And so the industry gets incentivized, and then you have a real problem. What do you think about that when Becker's lab was shut down, and with your work and seeing maybe the potential for harm and different people with power using it for negative reason, or maybe just unintentional and they just want to do it because the incentivization structure's there?
Yeah. So, okay, the first thing I'm going to say is just whatever you do, what I'll ask you to do is not to take a very short excerpt
I
of what I'm
won't,
about
yeah.
to say and put it up, because that happened recently. I was talking about this topic and somebody took like a 20-second thing and put it up, and it got people all crazy,
No
and so
context.
yeah, so exactly. So I want, if anybody actually cares about this, I want them to be able to hear what I'm saying. So a couple of things on this. First of all, Becker and Marino were both very interested in exogenous electromagnetic fields. Okay, so the kinds of things you get exposure to from appliances, cell phones, all that kind of stuff. What I work on is endogenous electrical gradients that are the natural way that cells communicate with each other. Those are not the same thing. They may intersect in some way, but I'll say right now, exogenous, because people assume, so people hear the electrical kinds of things that we do, and they say, "Oh my God, so this must mean that I'm gonna be wrecked by standing next to my toaster oven or something." What I'm saying is, there is absolutely so. So I think Andrew's absolutely right that there is evidence that applied external electromagnetic exposure is damaging to all kinds of biological systems. Okay, there is evidence for that, no doubt. However, I don't think it happens via the bioelectrical interface that we study. Okay, and the reason I say that is because we've tried, and I used to work in applied electromagnetics. By the way, I've published papers in it. I've shown how you can induce various defects and things like that. I mean, I know it's true, but I think the evidence that it happens via the natural bioelectricity that we study is non-existent. And in fact, it's extremely hard to do the kinds of things we do with applied fields. I would love to be able to use applied fields to do the kinds of manipulations that we do. That would be amazing therapeutically. It would be so good. It doesn't work because the kind of gradients that we need to set up are very complex pattern spatial gradients of resting potential, and you can't control those well with applied electrodes. In my lab, we use no applied electrodes, no magnets, no electromagnetics, no waves, no frequencies. We don't use any of that stuff because it is a very ineffective tool at manipulating the thing that we're doing. So but people, this is one thing about Rob Becker's book, is that it sort of combined those two things. So Becker talked a lot about the natural bioelectrics and then the dangers of applied. And back then, nobody knew the mechanisms of either one, so it kind of made sense to put them together. I don't really think they belong together. I think the epidemiology of and the bench biology of applied electromagnetic fields is important and interesting, and it has health implications for sure. But it is not. I don't think it's related to what we do. And the kinds of things that we do do not induce the sorts of dangers that Marino and others have been talking about. So I think both of those are true. And it is a real problem in science whenever you discover something that runs afoul of certain incentive structures, right? That's for sure problematic. So I have no doubt that he had some bad experiences with potential funders and regulatory agencies and so on.
Yeah, fascinating. Well, thanks for answering that. I know it's a little bit of a question that probably doesn't. I don't know, it's not something you want to waste your time doing, but it's one of those things that probably needs to be addressed, really, when you start to look at this stuff. People are very curious about that, for sure.
Yeah. It comes up, and I would just, I've been asked to testify in these, as an expert on this kind of stuff for people, cell phone towers going up and things like that. And it's a valid concern. There is wet lab data on it, and some epidemiological data on it. The only thing I would say to people is try to prioritize risks of various things. Yeah. Because we are overwhelmed with microplastics in our food, nasty chemicals in our food and drinking water, weird drugs in the water supply, bad air, infectious disease, which I'm particularly sort of worked up about, all kinds of infectious agents, not to mention the issues with lighting and ergonomics and just psychological. There are a million things that are impacting us negatively, and we all have limited time and limited effort to deal with these things. And so whatever concerns you have about EMF exposure, put them in the context of other things that are harming all of us on a daily basis. Right?
Yeah.
So,
and you can add more stress just by thinking about that all the time versus being grateful for the fact that you live inside of this weird, incredible technological landscape where you can have a cool life, even if it's however long. There's a lot of health benefit, I think, that comes from just your relationship to your environment. And so much dis-ease is caused by that. Oh my God, I got a tower going up over here and I'm not getting enough sunshine. People that are the biohackers and they're obsessives. I'm like, man, maybe you should just go create something and be grateful that you're alive. And, that guy that was 112 years old and he drank coffee every day and soup every day and whiskey. And he's like, but I was happy. And, the guy that's the vegan and they're counting every little calorie and their steps, they might die at 58 because they were so hyper stressed about this microcosm. So anyway.
Yeah, and I would never tell anybody which particular thing, if any, they should be worried about. But let's just on the grand scheme of things, whatever you're worried about, think of where it fits with the other kinds of things that we're all exposed to. There's a lot of harmful things in our environment right now, and also a lot of opportunities to do well and to improve the world and to do wonderful things. So
yeah, I'd love to talk a little bit about three key things while we have you, is mitochondria and what you know about them, and just describe what you're discovering and the effects that mitochondria health has, and like on the individual level, like what we can take from it on the practical level. If you know anything about that, I'd imagine you do quite a bit. And then Xenobots, like what are you creating and what are they and what does that imply?
Yeah, let's talk about the Xenobots because I'm not an expert on mitochondria. I can recommend, for example, Martin Picard, who's an amazing researcher that works on mitochondria metabolism and things like that. So you should have him on and talk to him. I know they're important, and I read what everybody reads, but I'm no mitochondria expert. What I'll say about I'll say a couple of things about Xenobots. So just to say what we've been doing. So Xenobots arise when you take a frog embryo and you basically take some of the cells off of the top that are going to become epithelium, meaning the cells that are covering it, and you set them aside and you give them a chance to reboot their multicellular lifestyle. And because you can imagine there are many things they could have done. They could have crawled away from each other. They could have made a flat cell monolayer like a cell culture. They could have died. Instead, what they do is they come together. They form this little ball. The little ball has little hairs on its surface that rotate, and as a result, they swim against the water that they're in. And so they start sort of zipping around, and they have their own they have their own behaviors and other capabilities. So those are called Xenobots. They're called Xenobots because Xenopus laevis is the name of it's the Latin name of the frog species that we use. So and they're a biorobotics platform. So we call them Xenobots. Then when we made those, and then some people said, well, this must be a weird quirk of frog embryology, and so I said, okay, what's the furthest thing away from a frog embryo? Well, let's try an adult human. And so we collected the cells from the epithelial. The airway, the epithelia in the airway, the trachea and the lungs. And we developed a protocol to do the same thing. We call them anthrobots because they're made of adult humans. And they do the same thing. They sort of acquire this amazing shape and then they swim around. So a couple of things. First of all, here are some of the things they do. Okay, and so this tells you a couple of things about why they're interesting, and then I'll say a few other things. They first of all, in either case, there's no genetic modification. There are no nanomaterials, there are no scaffolds, there are no weird drugs, there are no synthetic biology circuits. We don't touch the hardware really. What we are looking at is the plasticity of life. We are looking at the ability of cells to find themselves in a novel environment. In the case of the Xenobots, for example, we haven't added anything to them, but we've subtracted something. What we've subtracted are the influences of the other cells that normally bully these cells into having a boring two-dimensional life as the outer covering of a tadpole. And so you get rid of those cells, and then you find out what these cells really wanted to do, and what they really wanted to do, which is what they do when nobody else is telling them what to do, is to become the Xenobot. They express differently many genes than their native habitat. So in the case of the Xenobots, it's about 900 new genes. In the case of the Anthrobot, it's about 9,000. So almost half the is completely different. Again, we haven't touched the genome. This is them dipping into the genome to express new genes differently express genes than they would have otherwise in the body. What are some of these genes? Well, all kinds of things. But for example, in the case of the Xenobots, and this is the kind of late breaking stuff. In the case of the Xenobots, they express a whole bunch of genes associated with hearing. And when we saw that, we wondered, why would that be? And so, what would that be for? Could they possibly hear? And so we put speakers under their dishes, and we play sounds to them, and they respond. They can detect the different vibrations, and they their behavior changes. You can communicate with them that way, and this is something they do that's new. They also do what we call kinematic self-replication, which means that if you sprinkle a bunch of loose cells, epithelial cells, into the dish, they will run around, either individually or collectively. They run around and they collect these loose cells into little balls, and they sort of polish these little balls and squeeze them together. And guess what the little balls become? They become the next generation of Xenobots, and then they'll go and do the same thing, and they have multiple generations. Yeah, no other animal on Earth that we know of reproduces that way. The Anthrobots have a different capability. If you make a dish of human neurons, like plate a dish of human neurons, and you take a scalpel, put a big scratch through it, the Anthrobots will sit in that scratch, and over 4 days they take the two ends of the wound and they knit them together. They repair the neural damage. But who would have thought that the cells in your airway, given the opportunity, would form a little proto-organism that can go around fixing neural damage? And that's just, I'm sure that's just the tip of the iceberg, because that was the first thing we tried. That wasn't, experiment number 900 where we were looking for something. That was the first thing we tried. So probably they can do a lot more things. So they're interesting. So why do we make all these things? Well, they're interesting for a number of reasons. First of all, practicalities. So Xenobots can be useful living machines to clean up the environment, to do sensing, to do exploration, that kind of thing. Anthrobots are an agential intervention that can be used in your own body someday, where you won't need immune suppression because they're your own cells. So they're patient specific. They're made of your own cells. They at the very least, we know they can heal neural wounds. Who knows what else they can do? Maybe they can clean up your arteries or arthritic knee joints, or develop or drop off pro-regenerative kinds of molecules. Who knows? So useful living machines is one thing. Another reason why they're interested is because they're teaching us about the plasticity of life. Think about it. For every other kinds of living creature, if you ask why does it have the shape and the behavior that it has, the answer is always evolution. Well, that's it. I mean, it is how it is because for eons, it's been selected for this specific shape, and everything else got killed off. And so there you have it. Well, there's never been any Xenobots. There's never been any Anthrobots. There's never been evolutionary pressure to be a good Anthrobot and go around healing neural wounds. There's never been any pressure to do kinematic replication really well as a Xenobot. That's never existed. So that brings up a really fascinating question about, I told you that bioelectrical pattern memories guide morphogenesis, right? They tell you how, what your face is going to look like, how many fingers, all that. Where do those patterns come from? And so in traditional beings, they were sculpted by evolution. That's where they come from. But in these kind of cases, there is no evolutionary history. So that opens up to some really interesting questions about the ultimate source for some of these things. And we could talk about my speculations on that. But what's important about these kinds of synthetic beings that have never been here before is that they're kind of exploration vehicles for the space of possibilities, right? Wow. So we typically see one genome. And we see, okay, here's the frog embryo. Well, I guess we know what the genome can do. It can make this frog embryo. No, there's a whole space around it, and we've only we've only seen a little tiny bits of it. What can it actually do? And to really understand that problem-solving capacity of life, we didn't have to tell an Anthrobot how to be an Anthrobot. It did that on its own. When we made it impossible for the Xenobots to reproduce in a normal froggy fashion, they figured out another way of doing it. They figured out which genes to express. We didn't tell them which genes to express. So figuring out that problem solving, that plasticity that allows life to self-organize some kind of coherent solution in novel circumstances is really critical, not just for understanding what we are and what evolution is and where we came from and all of that, but also for biomedicine, for example, for understanding how do cells know what to do, and could we learn from them, right? And use that kind of thing to solve problems that we don't yet know how to solve in medical context. So that's another reason they're interesting. Another reason they're interesting is that by learning to communicate anatomical goals, it's both of these things are like a simple system in which we can try to crack the morphogenetic code. In other words, what stimuli do I need to give these cells to get them to build this instead of that? Because if we could solve that, we would have what I call an anatomical compiler. This idea that in the future you should be able to sit in front of a computer and draw the plant, animal, organ, biobot, whatever biological. You want a 7-legged frog with a propeller on top, you should be able to draw, and the compiler should be able to tell you what stimuli have to be given to cells to get them to build exactly that. Not a 3D printer, a communications device, right? Wow. To convert your design spec into the memory, into the morphogenetic set point of the cell, so that they go ahead and build that. So we're going to try to figure out, and so this is with Josh Bongard's lab at UVM. We're working on a robot scientist platform that's going to help us use these kinds of things to figure out that morphogenetic code, how to communicate anatomical goals. Because if you can do that, birth defects, traumatic injury, aging, degenerative disease, cancer, all those things go away. If you knew, right? If we knew how to tell cells what to build, all that goes away. And the final thing that I'm really interested in with these synthetic constructs is the impact on our understanding of ethics, of how to relate to beings that are not like us. In other words, use them as a simple model system, because let's face it, it's not about humans versus AI, right? There's going to be every in between. You're going to have cyborgs and hybrids and augmented humans, and in the next 10, 20 years, the variety of beings that we're going to see is incredible. The space of possible with sensory augmentation, sensory substitution, modifications of body and cognition with all kinds of technologies, both biological and technological. It is going to be completely untenable to try to maintain these sharp categories. And we need to, and this is, I think, an important part of the field of diverse intelligence, is to be able to develop tools, rigorous tools for recognizing and communicating with and ethically relating to beings that are nowhere on the tree of life with us, right? That you can't do what we normally do. Well, it kind of looks like a snake, and so whatever. We're going to have, and so I see these novel beings as just beginning to kind of stretch the imagination of people, to get beyond here's the standard tree of life, and I kind of know what to expect from beings on this tree of life.
It's so fascinating. That seems incredible that you're discovering all this stuff. It's unlimited, really, what you're leaning into here.
It's absolutely unlimited, and I mean, it's a hard job. I still say it's the best job in the world. Every week I see and I hear from my people something that it just blows my mind and puts us in a whole new way of thinking about things.
That's very exciting. Yeah, and then I've heard you mention like AI. People are sort of scared about us creating AI and where it's going to go, but you brought up the point that basically every person born is an AI being released into 3D reality, I guess you could call it, this potentiality. And it's like, can you go into that a little bit? Because that was really interesting.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, to be clear, I am not stating that there are no dangers to AI and that we're not going to find some way to screw ourselves with this invention. We are very good at figuring out ways to do bad things with novel inventions. So it is entirely possible that we're going to figure out how to wreck ourselves this way. So I'm not sort of a blind optimist on it. But what I do want to point out is that most of the problems that people bring up in terms of AI are actually not about AI whatsoever. They're ancient, fundamental human existential questions that have always been around. You take your pick. So for example, some people say we're going to get replaced. Well, guess what? You were guaranteed to be replaced. Both you on a personal level are guaranteed to be replaced, and the version of humanity, society, whatever that you're used to is guaranteed to be replaced. That was always true. That was true from the time of our hominid ancestors. That was true for as civilizations come and go, as people have kids and they wonder, are my kids going to find any of my values relevant? You know, I mean, it's a joke that you know, as far back as you can find you know, archaeological writings where people say, the kids today, you know, they don't listen to their, you know, they don't listen to adults, and like this is as old as the hills. And when people say we're going to make these intelligent beings, yeah, we have been for how long creating anybody. You know, as they say, you need a license to go fishing in certain places. What you don't need a license for is to get together with somebody and create a guaranteed high level intelligence with no guarantee that it's going to be treated well, that it's going to be raised well, that it's going to do wonderful things as opposed to horrific things. That this happens everywhere, all over the world, all the time. And so, yes, of course, generating something that's got way more thinking power than a human does raise some new issues. But the issue of continuously generating high intelligence agents without really knowing what they're going to do, that's been with us forever. Okay, and with very limited, you know, anybody who's had kids knows you have very limited ability to know what's going to, or to determine what's going to happen later on. That kind of thing. You know, things around meaning. You know, people say, what am I going to do when the AI does X, Y, Z better than I can do it? Well, pretty much, I mean, I don't know about anybody else, but for me, pretty much anything I want to do, somebody in the world, in fact, many people in the world are way better at it than me. And I already know that there are people in the world that do things better than I. There are aliens somewhere else that do everything better than any of us can do. That doesn't bother me. You know, I don't do things because I think I'm the best at it, right? You know, I would have nothing to do if that was the criteria. So that's, you know, that again, that raises an important existential question. Do you want to do art and sports and science and everything else when there are other people that are way better at it than you? So I just, you know, I think, and we can go on and on with this stuff. I have a paper that basically like takes you through all this. I think that what the AI is doing is bringing to the fore some things that were easier to ignore back, you know, before that. But these are fundamentally things that we as humanity don't have good answers for. And it's just reminding us that we've never solved some of these important problems, you know, around the value of your life. What should you be doing? And does it matter that we're going to be replaced and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. AI is exciting. AIs, Kevin Kelly talks about it as multiple because it's just going to be so many hundreds of thousands of different forms and different scales. And it's more about being curious and looking at ways to use it to optimize or to make things better, you know, if we can, if we're going to have it. So,
yeah. And you know, like I said, there's going to be every variety of intermediate combination, right? So yes, there will be AIs that sit in a server box somewhere, but there will also be humans with you know, different cognitive implants and senses, you know, and there'll be people walking around who decided that they wanted to add the solar, weather, and the stock market as the primary senses that they can feel, and other people that are linked, you know, to other. There's, you know, there's a group of 7 people that are all kind of sharing some cognition, and I mean, it's going to be incredibly wild and weird, and science fiction has been dealing with this forever, of course. And it's time for us to catch up because this is a reality, and our old categories of man versus machine are not going to cut it. We really need a new ethic for the future.
yeah. And I think the faster you can embrace weird and look at it as a good thing, the better your life will be. Because I think it's only going to get exponentially weirder, which makes it more exciting to me because I'm a part of it and I'm inside of it. And like, what else could you have as a relationship to it other than awe, wonder, curiosity versus like, oh, it's bad. You don't even know enough. We don't know enough to worry or to get caught up in the negative relationship to it, I don't think.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I don't think it's crazy to try and direct where things are going to go. So if somebody has an opinion as to we really should be doing it this way versus that way, that's, you know, that's reasonable. I think we should be guided, you know, where we're going. But overall, it's I kind of sometimes, like, you know, you think back, and when you're a kid in school and you for the first time you hear about what primitive life was like, right? And you think, my God, how could people live this way? That basically, you know, you step on a sharp stick and you're done for because you're going to get sepsis and die. I think if we survive long enough, I think the people of the future are going to study us, and they're going to say, "My God, these people, they had to live their entire life in whatever body they randomly got at birth. How can you live, and whatever stray cosmic ray hit your cells as an embryo and gave you limitations, on your lifespan, on your, you got a certain IQ limits, and you've got to, eventually you're going to get lower back pain and astigmatism and brain degeneration, all this. People live that way, and they just had to live with whatever body they were randomly given by the vagaries of trial and error evolution. I mean, like, who can live that way? I think it's going to be unthinkable to the mature species that we had so little control, and that there were so many people. Because I know, because I get these emails. Well, I get both emails. I get emails that are screaming, "Hurry up! I've got, my kid has whatever, and I've got whatever, and so hurry up! What's taking you so long?" And then the other emails that say, "This is totally scary. You shouldn't be working with frog cells or worms or whatever." Right? So I get both.
That's fascinating.
It's wild, but I think it's going to be really crazy for people in the future to think back, like, these were the limitations they had, and also some people wanted to stay that way, and and when people tell me that the future is scary and all these augmented change, what if the future humans are going to be different and we're going to disappear? Like, I don't know, if somebody said to me, "We're going to leave here and come back in 1,000 years or longer," I would be unbelievably shocked to find out that when we come back, we are still finding the same people with the same IQ limits, with the same susceptibility to viruses and bacteria, the same lifespan limit, and the same inability to pursue your true potential because of what the vagaries of evolution that handed you. I would be shocked to find the same kind of humans around. I assume that if we don't kill ourselves off, we can do better than this. But that's just.
I love it. No, your perspectives are fascinating for sure, and expanding too. I like that they're always expanding and making you look at things broader, because it's much more simple to try to narrow it down and look at it in one linear model, and you're very good at helping people to see all the possibility, which I think is awesome. I know your time's limited, and you got to get going, but if you were going to die today, what would you want to share with the world?
Wow. That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I don't particularly feel I have anything, unique that anybody, I'm not sitting on anything that anybody must hear if I die today. But I think what is important is to really open your mind to the possibilities, to really realize that all of us were shaped by evolution, by our upbringing, by the firmware that we've been handed along our developmental lineage. We are all shaped to see certain things and to miss other things, right? Kind of like the electromagnetic spectrum. We see a tiny little band of it, but with some clever thinking and experimentation, now we know that there's this giant spectrum, and we can make use of it with other tools, and we can use it to make life better. And so I think just to be aware that we are all using filters of this type all the time, and to ask yourself what are the filters that I can take off, and where does that get us? What's the positive thing I can do? And I think this is I guess I'll just go to this. When people email me, I even made a chart that I send them. People email me, "Okay, I've read your paper. I understand that I'm a collective of cells, and I don't know what to do with myself now." Or I read Robert Sapolsky's book and on free will, and now I don't think I matter anymore, and things like that. And I made a chart that basically shows all the different options, and then there's arrows, and the arrows they all go to the same thing, because it doesn't matter. None of this actually matters, because no matter what you are, whether you're a majestic spirit in a meat body, or whether you're a group of cells, or whatever it is, I don't know of any better answer than do the most interesting thing you can and be kind. Like, that's it. I don't know what else I don't know what other implications you could derive from any of these theories about what we are. And yeah, I think just to think about what kind of filters you're operating with, and how to get past at least some of them, to do more interesting, more positive things.
I love it. Yeah, it's very practical, and I really appreciate you spending some time today because you can do this for hours. I will put some things in the show notes for people to find your lab, your work, and all your videos, and I appreciate you, Michael.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I appreciate it a lot. Thank you for the conversation. Yeah, thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, send me a link when you're ready. And and if you need, I can give you a link to my blog and some other things that people might want to see.
Absolutely. Thanks for your time, and keep up the awesome work you're doing. I'm loving it.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks. See you.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the episode. Be sure to subscribe to the show on Spotify, YouTube, and iTunes, and rate the show. I hope you enjoyed the episode.
What we call reality is in fact nothing more than a culturally sanctioned and linguistically reinforced hallucination.